Welcome to my 14-day SAT prep series. Today is day 12 out of 14, and today we're going to cover SAT writing tips and tricks, as well as a couple SAT reading tips. So the reason why today we're going to cover a lot of SAT writing tips and tricks is because I've already given you a lot of math tips and tricks, and the reason why I want to focus on math tips and tricks and writing tips and tricks as far as giving you the most of those is those are the easiest questions and the easiest sections to improve quickly on. So since this prep course is only 14 days, we're going to want to target those areas where we can make really quick improvements, and that's going to be with the writing tips and tricks and with the math tips and tricks. So today's video is going to have probably around 40 minutes of SAT writing tips and tricks that are designed to show you how to move efficiently on the SAT writing section, how to identify question types, and how to use that identifying of question types in order to find your correct answer. So it's really going to focus on teaching you what to look for on the SAT writing section. Keep in mind, I scored perfectly on the writing section on back-to-back SATs, so I'm really showing you what I look for and what you can use to identify incorrect answers as well as correct answers. So there's going to be a lot of that because you can improve fairly quickly on the SAT writing section if you understand these sort of tips and tricks. So that's why I'm giving those to you now. Now there's also going to be about 2 SAT reading tip videos contained in this video as well. Those are going to be designed to help you with the reading section, but the reading section is the hardest section to improve on, which is why we're targeting the math tips and tricks, which we talked about in the past 12 days, and these writing tips and tricks more, because those tips and tricks for the writing and math sections are going to help you improve a lot faster, whereas the reading section takes a lot longer time, and we've only got 14 days in this 14-day prep course. If you're looking for a longer prep course, I also have a 90-day SAT prep series available on my channel. You can find that in the playlist section. It'll also pop up at the end of this video. So either if you're looking for one that is longer, you can find that one as well. So after today, you've got 2 days left. You have day 13 and you have day 14. So day 13, obviously, you're taking the SAT on day 15 if you're following this 14-day prep course. So I'll go ahead and put that. SAT we'll put is day 15. So obviously there won't be a video for that, but I'm counting on that being the day that you take the SAT. That's what this 14-day course was designed for. So on day 13, what you're going to do is we're going to have practice problems for all 4 sections. So I'm going to go through problems for the reading passage. I'll do 1 reading passage. I'll do 2 writing passages. I will do 1 math no calculator test, and I will do 1 math with calculator problem. So I won't do a full math with calculator test, but I will do some problems from it. So what that's going to do is it's going to help you review how to solve problems, right? So I'll be going through, I'll solve a reading passage, solve 2 writing passages, solve a math no calculator section, and then solve some math with calculator problems. So that's going to kind of help you stay refreshed, keep focus. And then on day 14, which will be the day before you take the SAT, that's where we're really going to focus on a lot of things at once. So it's really going to be a combination of focusing on all of these things that are written down here, but in a shorter amount of time for each one. So we're going to start with a pacing review. That's going to be the first thing. So that's not going to go through as in-depth as the last pacing review did, but it's going to briefly cover how you should approach questions in the math section, reading section, writing section, how much time you should spend on things and things like that. After that, we're going to review those math formulas and equations that we brought up on the first day. After that, we're going to get into some grammar rules, and keep in mind I might change the order on this, but this is what is going to be contained in that video. So if it's a different order on that video, it certainly could be than what's written here, but it's going to contain all of these things. Then after that, once again, we're going to go through a reading passage because I do want you to stay fresh and stay with a good understanding of types of questions that are going to be asked and things like that. And we'll do a writing passage. Keep in mind that's not a full section we're going to do, just 1 passage. Then after that, we'll do some math no calculator problems. Once again, not the full section, just some questions. And then the math with calculator problems. Once again, just a few questions. So what day 14 is designed to do is just really kind of bring everything together the day before you take the SAT. Make sure that you're reminded of all your math formulas, grammar rules you need to follow. And then at the same time, also make sure that you're ready with this practice problem. So just a few practice problems, not going to overwork you the day before the SAT, but just make sure that you're fresh and that you're reintroduced and that you're comfortable answering the questions. So that's going to be what today, day 13, day 14 is going to be. But for today, once again, giving you a lot of those writing tips and tricks that are designed to help you improve that writing score pretty quickly. And then we'll also have 2 reading tips at the end as well. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with the writing tips. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, have a great day. Let's get started right now. Today I have an SAT writing tip for you that deals with interpreting a graph and applying it to the scenario given in the SAT writing passage. So in this case, to illustrate this tip and trick, I'm going to use SAT Practice Test 8, questions 5 and 6 that deal with the graph shown on the next page right here, the EPA estimates of municipal solid waste discarded in U.S. landfills in 2009. So let's take a look at questions 5 and 6, and as I go through them, I'll really illustrate this tip and trick to you. So question 5, it states, the writer wants to include information from the graph that is consistent with the description of compost in the passage. Which choice most effectively accomplishes this goal? Well, in this passage, if we just read a little bit of this first sentence here, we'll be able to understand what the passage is talking about with compost. We have, in spite of all compost potential uses, however, most of this so-called waste is wasted. According to the EPA, over 13 million tons, well, right now it says of metal. We know we're talking about food waste because we're talking about composting, so we wouldn't want to say of metal ended up in U.S. landfills in 2009, along with 13 million tons of yard debris. We wouldn't want to talk about rubber and leather either, or textiles. We want to talk about food waste because we're talking about composting. So the only answer choice here that's going to be consistent with the description of compost in the passage is D. So here's my tip when dealing with questions of interpreting data in graph. For question 5, obviously we didn't have to interpret anything in the graph because it was just what fit with the passage, right? We wouldn't want to say anything other than food waste because we want to talk about composting. So in that situation, we didn't need to use the graph. But if we look at question 6, we are going to want to potentially take a look at the graph. So let's take a look. It says the writer wants to support the paragraph's main idea with accurate, relevant information from the graph. Which choice most effectively accomplishes this goal? So the key part that I'm seeing here is the word accurate, relevant information from the graph. In order for us to include anything from the graph, we have to check with the graph and make sure that it's accurate and true. So even if only one answer choice looked like it would be logical and support our point, we still have to check in the graph to make sure it's true. So let's take a look at question 6. We have remarkably, and then we're going to input either less glass, more metal, more food waste, or more yard waste was discarded in landfills in that year than any other substance, including plastics or paper. So which substance had the highest disposal in these landfills? And we see that that's going to be food waste because we have the amount of waste in millions of tons on our y-axis. Our highest bar graph we see is food waste. Okay, so we're going to want to use food waste right there. We see that that is going to be answer choice C. So our correct answer for number 6 will be C. Okay, obviously that supports our point as well because it's showing that food waste, there is a lot of waste, which supports that first sentence we had in our intro saying most of this so-called waste is indeed wasted. Okay, so the big things that you need to understand when dealing with graphs on the SAT writing section are A, if you're asked about something being accurate and relevant to the graph, you have to make sure that it is indeed accurate and relevant to the graph. And that means you have to actually take a look at the graph. You can't just pick the choice that would make sense in the passage, because if it's not true according to the graph, it cannot be the correct answer. Another thing that you want to keep in mind is that you want to make sure you're staying on topic. So even if the graph has something, such as in question 5, even if it has rubber and leather or textiles or metal in the graph, you can't just pick one of those even if it was accurate, okay, because it doesn't support the point of the passage. So if we take a look, if we were to say 6 million tons of rubber and leather, let's see if it's accurate. It's probably going to be accurate according to the graph, right? We see rubber and leather, it's right around 6 million. So even though it's accurate to the graph, that doesn't mean it's the correct answer, because we see that 33 million tons of food waste is also accurate to the graph and it supports our point. We want to use the one that's accurate to the graph and supports our point. So anytime you're dealing with a table or a graph, you want to make sure that it's both accurate with what you're saying in the passage and in the graph, and also that it supports your point and what you're saying in that sentence and in that paragraph as a whole. So hopefully this video was helpful. Today I have an SAT writing tip for you that deals with commas between adjectives as well as commas between two subjects. So I want to use question 13 from SAT practice test 8 to illustrate this tip and trick that you need to pay attention for and watch for when taking the SAT writing section. So make sure to like, subscribe, and share, and let's go ahead and get into this tip. So when I look at question 13, I'll go ahead and read off the sentence. We have buildings are draped with festive red banners and garlands. Okay, so the key thing that I'm looking at here is I notice I have 3 commas. Okay, I also notice that festive and red are both adjectives, so I'll mark them with an A. Now I have banners and garlands. Now my only 2 subjects here are banners and garlands. So when we have 2 subjects, we do not need a comma after the second one. So I know immediately any answer choice with a comma after banners can be removed. So that gets rid of A and it gets rid of B. Another thing that I see that I know I could get rid of B on is I see I have buildings are draped with. I don't need a comma there either. So I could get rid of B based on that, as well as the comma after banners. The next thing I'm looking at between C and D, obviously the only difference there would be that M dash after banners. If we have 2 subjects like this, in this case banners and garlands, right, that's your list of 2, you don't put an M dash in there, so automatically I know C would be wrong, I know D would be my right answer. Today I have an SAT writing tip for you that deals with maintaining and matching style within a passage. So make sure to like, subscribe, and share. And with that, let's go ahead and get into this SAT writing tip and trick. So this comes from SAT Practice Test 8. We're going to be dealing with question 18. So the question states, which choice provides information that is most consistent in style and content with information about the symbolism of the tortoise? Okay, so we need to know what symbolism the tortoise, what that's talking about. So let's go ahead and read through, starting at sentence 1. So we have, well, there are many regional variations of the lion dance costume. All make extensive use of symbols and colors. The lion's head is often adorned with a phoenix, and then we have what we're going to replace it with right there. We don't need to read that yet. Or a tortoise for longevity. So there's our tortoise reference. Now I see in parentheses I have for longevity. Now ideally I want to use parallelism and have for and then something over here within that parentheses. So I'm going to take a look at my answer choices. I see I have that in B and D, so that's where I'm going to look first. Now the next thing I see is that I say for longevity when applying it to the tortoise. Okay, so I don't want to say for symbolic reasons. I want to state what the symbolic reason is. So I know D is wrong because it doesn't state what the symbolic reason is. It just says for symbolic reasons. And I need to maintain that parallelism and show what that symbolic reason is. Now from Chinese mythology, once again, that's not telling me the symbolic reason. Now a mythical bird, once again, not telling me the symbolic reason. I need it to tell me what the symbol means, right? What the reason behind it is. And in this case, I see I have B, for new beginnings. Maintains the parallelism with the word for in both parts there, and then it also has the reason or the symbol, what it means, right? It means new beginnings, which matches that meaning of longevity. So I know my answer there is going to be B. So the big tip that you can take away from this is when you're dealing with maintaining style and content, you want to look for things like that. Things like parallelism can help you maintain style and content. Another thing to note is sometimes you're asked to match tone. In that case, you want to make sure that you're just matching the tone and the general vibe that you get throughout the passage. As well with style, you can look around for context clues as far as where certain words are used, what kind of words are used to help you maintain that style. So obviously anything that seems out of order should be a red flag when dealing with style questions. Anything that seems like it's a poor word choice or a word choice that wouldn't naturally be contained within the passage would be a red flag. Those are things that you should watch for when dealing with style questions. So hopefully that was helpful. If it was, today I have an SAT writing tip for you that deals with when to add versus not add a graph. So this question isn't necessarily one that shows up a ton on the SAT writing section, but it's one that you should be familiar with and know what to do in case it does show up. So let's go ahead and take a look at practice test 8, question 25, and we see that it says at this point the writer is considering adding the following graph. So in order to know whether or not we're going to add a graph, we really need to know what's going on in that paragraph as a whole. So let's go back up. Let's take a look at what's going on in this paragraph. So we have court reporting, humans versus machines. Court reporters for years have been the record keepers of the court, taking scrupulous notes during hearings, depositions, and other legal proceedings. Despite the increasing use of digital recording technologies, court reporters still play a vital role in courtrooms. So we see court reporters play a vital role in courtrooms, so they play an important role. And then we see after 25, we have, although machines can easily make digital audio recordings of court events, they lack the nuance of human court reporters in providing a precise record. All right, so now I take a look at the title of my graph. It says salary comparison, court reporters versus other occupations. Now one thing I want to take note of right away that jumps out to me is that I never talked about salary in my paragraph. Not once was money discussed or salary, nothing with compensation, nothing with comparing the job of legal reporters to other U.S. occupations, right? There was no comparison to other U.S. occupations or other legal occupations, really. It was only about court reporters. So that comparison doesn't make sense. Additionally, we're talking about salary in this graph. I never talked about salary or compensation in my paragraphs. That's a red flag, big, big, big red flag telling me I should not add this graph because it's offering nothing to my paragraph. It adds no support. It adds nothing as far as explaining something that was complex. No addition there. We do not want to add this. So we can go ahead and get rid of the yeses because we know we definitely don't want to add it because it's really not related to what we're talking about other than the fact that it shows the salary of court reporters. But even that is not related to what we're talking about because we aren't talking about how much they're paid. Okay, so we're not going to want to add it. Now let's take a look at our two options. We're going to start with D first because I know that that's wrong and I want to show you why it's wrong. So we have D, no, because it does not provide information about the pay scale for more experienced court reporters. Once again, we're not talking about their salaries. Okay, the key part as to why we don't want to add this is because even if it shows the salaries of court reporters, that's not the subject of the paragraph, so we would be blurring our focus. So the correct answer here is going to be C. No, we don't want to add this paragraph because it's presenting information that's not directly related to the paragraph's discussion of the role of court reporters. If you have a graph and you're asked whether you should add or delete it or add or not add it, you would only want to add it if it's directly supporting something you're saying in that paragraph. If it's directly supporting an idea in the paragraph, or it's providing a piece of evidence in the paragraph, or it's showing a comparison that you make in the paragraph, or it's explaining a key concept in the paragraph, those would be reasons to add a graph to a passage. Now, reasons you would not want to add a graph to a passage, let's talk about some of those. So some of the major reasons that you would want to make sure you don't add a paragraph to a passage is obviously if it's unrelated, okay? In this case, we see that this graph right here, it's unrelated to what we're talking about, okay? We know it's talking about salary, and we know in our paragraph we do not talk about salary. So that's obviously a red flag. We want to make sure we don't want to add anything that's unrelated, anything that contradicts. If something contradicts what you're saying in your paragraph, you would not want to add it. Anything like that, anything that's unrelated, that is contradictory or just completely off topic, you want to make sure that you're not adding it to that passage. So hopefully this video is, today I have an SAT writing tip for you that deals with the uses of dashes and also being efficient in word choice and having good diction. So with that, let's go ahead and get into this tip. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. This comes from SAT Practice Test 8. It's going to be question 29. So let's take a look at it. If we read our sentence, we have champions of court reporting, though, are you the opposite, right? And then we see we have they are you, which is obviously an immediate red flag to me because I know I just said champions of court reporting, which is they, and I say are you right here. So saying they are you again is obviously something I want to get rid of because that's wordy. So immediately I see that as a red flag. I look at my question, I see I have which choice most effectively combines the sentences at the underlined portion. So obviously I want to get rid of they are you. So I don't want to have that. I see I have their opinion. Once again, that's really similar to they are you. That's really repetitive, redundant. I don't want to use that. It's too wordy. So I can go ahead and get rid of D. I look at C. I have which is. Once again, kind of wordy. So I'm going to put a dash by it because I obviously don't want to use it because it already appears wordy, but I'll look at A and B, make sure they're grammatically correct. And if they are, I can go ahead and eliminate C for being wordy. So let's take a look at it. So we got champions of court reporting, though, are you the opposite? Well, what is the opposite? It's that with increased reliance on technology, errors actually increase. So I see I don't even need they are you. I also don't need which is. So I see that that will for sure be wordy, and there's definitely a more efficient way to say it. So I don't want to use C. C is obviously going to be wrong. Next, I look at A and I look at B. I see in B, I use a dash after the word opposite, and then I say exactly what it is explaining, right? Champions of court reporting, though, are you the opposite? Now I'm going to explain what that opposite is. That with the increased reliance on technology, errors actually increase. Okay, so that in that case, I'd be using a M dash and then providing an explanatory relationship, which is perfectly grammatically correct. So I know B will be my correct answer. If I look at A, I can show you why A is wrong as well. If I look at the word such is telling me that there should be an example following it. So if I have champions of court reporting, though, are you the opposite, comma, such that with the increased reliance on technology, errors actually increase. When I have the word such, it would be looking for an example after that, and I don't really have an example after that, so I know A would be wrong. Okay, if you see that you have something like this where you have a sentence that is, in this example, obviously indicating that something is the opposite, right after that, we would want to use an M dash and say what that opposite is, right? We'd be looking to explain what the opposite is in the fewest words possible since we already said that it's the opposite. So you could go ahead and infer what it's going to be because it says that it's the opposite. Obviously, you need the context from the paragraph above it. I'm not going to go get that right now because I'll try to keep this video short and brief, but you would be able to know what it is. You would see M dash, the most efficient way to do it. You want to avoid these two wordy options in C and in D, so you can get rid of those. You'd see you have such. You see that there's no example after it. No example, so you would want to get rid of A. Obviously, the most efficient way to do this then is with the M dash. B is correct. So hopefully this video is helpful. Today I'll be giving you a tip/trick for the SAT writing section that I would think that you should really pay attention to because it's something that could really trip you up if you're not careful. So to illustrate the point that I'm going to make here, I'm going to use question 44 from SAT Practice Test 7 because this doesn't show up a lot, but it is something that could definitely trip you up if you're not careful. So what I want to do here is I want to show you this tip. I call it the trump card trick, right? Now, it's not dealing with anything with Donald Trump, but it's called the trump card trick because this kind of trumps everything else, right? So generally, if we're looking at which choice most effectively signals a comparison the writer is making between two groups of people mentioned, right? If we're looking to compare things, we generally would want to avoid using not unlike, right? Because we know that not unlike just means like. So we would probably want to avoid A is what we would be immediately thinking. But here's the problem. The problem is A is actually correct, right? And that may come off as surprising because you might be thinking, why would we say not unlike and not just say like? Well, the reason A has to be correct is because if we look at options B through D, let's take a look at them. They say unlike, not like, and different from. A is the only one that means similar, okay? So I'm calling this the trump SAT writing trick, or trump card SAT writing trick, because in this case we're talking about how the correct relationship trumps everything, okay? So the correct relationship trumps everything, okay? The correct relationship between two ideas is going to trump everything. Okay, so in this case, let's take a look. So you haven't obviously read this passage, and I'm not going to make you read the whole thing, so I'll just give you a quick summary. It talks about how people got caught up in the excitement of this news story on the radio about aliens, and people believed it. And then it talks about how the American public embraced the legend that a ton of people were believing it, when in reality, probably not that many people actually believed it. Okay, so in this case, the researchers are suggesting that similar, okay, so like, right, similar or like, the people who got caught up in the excitement of the story when reading about it in the newspaper, the American public also may have been willing to embrace the legend because of its appeal to the imagination, right? So the news story appealed to the imagination, and so did this legend of people believing it. Okay, so those two things are similar, and those people are similar. Okay, so we need something that shows that they're similar to express that correct relationship. Now, the only option that says that they are similar is not unlike. So, well, normally we would want to just say like, because saying not unlike, it just doesn't sound well. We wouldn't normally say it. A has to be correct because it's the only answer choice that shows that they are similar. B, C, and D all shows that they are different. Okay, so none of those can be correct. Our answer has to be A, even though when at first looking at it, you may think not unlike has to be wrong because it has not and un in it, right? Which reduce each other and just make the word like. So you can't just do that. You have to make sure that it's showing the correct relationship. So in a situation like this where you're showing the relationship between two ideas or two subjects, make sure it's the correct relationship because the correct relationship trumps everything. Okay, so hopefully this video is helpful. This one's really more of a word of a warning. As it is a tip and trick, but definitely it's a word of warning to make sure you're looking for that correct relationship between two things. Okay, correct relationships and identifying those are very important on the SAT writing section. So hopefully this video is helpful. I'll be giving you an SAT writing tip and trick that deals with adding or not adding a sentence or keeping or deleting a sentence. So a common question on the SAT writing section is whether or not a sentence should be kept or deleted or added or not added. Now, when dealing with this question, it's important to consider context as well as the purpose of including that sentence. So what I want to do here is I want to take you through 3 different questions from SAT Practice Test 5 that deal with keeping or deleting a sentence or adding or not adding a sentence. So those questions are going to be number 3, number 27, and number 38. So as I go through, pay attention to both how I'm getting to my answer, and I'm also going to explain to you why these answers are correct, as well as common things that you can know in order to determine whether or not a sentence should be kept or deleted. So let's take a look at number 3. So the writer is considering deleting the underlined sentence. Should the sentence be kept or deleted? So now in this context of this paragraph, we have a 3D printer then builds a polymer based on this blueprint, much as a regular computer printer reproduces digital documents on paper. Now this passage is talking about 3D printers and x-rays as well. So in this case, we have number 3, right? Our third question. We have, whereas the head of an ordinary computer printer moves back and forth while printing ink onto paper, the corresponding part of a 3D printer moves in multiple dimensions while squirting out thin layers of melted polymer plastic. Okay, so it's describing how a 3D printer works. Then we have the plastic hardens quickly, right? So we just talked about melted polymer plastic, and I see my next sentence talks about plastic hardening quickly, allowing the printer to build the layers of the final model. Okay, so that's more and more expansion on how a 3D printer works. Now, if we were to remove sentence 3, we'd be interrupting and not having the whole story behind how a 3D printer works. We would be removing pretty much, it looks like a third of this description, at least a third, maybe even a half of the description of how a 3D printer works. And that's what this discussion from here all the way down is about. It's about how that 3D printer works. So we want to make sure we're keeping this sentence because it's providing details that are illustrating how a 3D printer works, which go along obviously with this sentence after. The plastic hardens quickly. Well, what plastic? Well, that would be that plastic that is melted polymer. Okay, so we can obviously see using context clues we have to keep this because if we don't, I'm going to put this in green, if we don't keep this sentence, then the part here, the plastic hardens quickly, will not make sense. So we have to keep that sentence. So one thing that you can do when considering whether to add a sentence or not add it or whether to keep a sentence or delete it is you can look at context around it. So notice how I looked back a sentence when figuring out how to place this. Now obviously if I was taking the SAT writing section I would have just read that sentence so I wouldn't have to go back and reread it. But notice how I use context, right? I see before I'm talking about a 3D printer and how it's working based on a blueprint, and then I see after I'm talking about plastic hardening quickly. Well, I don't talk about that if I were to remove this, so I have to keep it because I have this part here, that melted polymer plastic. So using context clues to decide whether you should keep or delete a sentence is a really, really great strategy for the SAT writing section. So correct answer for 3 will be B, and at this point I'm going to move on to question 27, give you some more advice on how to deal with these types of questions. Okay, so let's go down and take a look at 27. Okay, so 27. Okay, so in this passage we're talking about crowdfunding of the arts. So I see at 27, I'm told that the writer is considering adding the following sentence. The sentence is, crowdfunding tends to attract contributors from a wide variety of professional fields. So I'm going to give you some context for this. In this passage, we're talking about how in the arts, they're using crowdfunding, obviously to raise money. Now the main focus here is about more on the arts and the artists and how they're crowdfunding and how it's impacting the work that they produce. It's not focusing at all on the types of people who are donating, right? The types of people, what professional fields they're from that are donating, right? That are contributing. Okay, so they're not focusing on that. So in this case, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure that we do not add this. Okay, we don't want to add it, and why? Well, let's take a look at this paragraph, and it'll give you a little bit more insight into what the passage is about as well that way. So we have artists such as these Brooklyn performers find that crowdfunding exacerbates problems that already exist. Work that is easily understood and appreciated is supported, while more complex work goes unnoticed. Okay, at this point, I'm told that the writer is considering adding the following sentence. Crowdfunding tends to attract contributors from a wide variety of professional fields. Okay, so right there it doesn't make sense already, but in this case I'm going to read on because I always want to see what that next sentence is, okay? Because that next sentence, if it also doesn't make sense with it, then obviously I can go ahead and make sure that I don't add it. But if something in that next sentence told me I needed to add it, then I would want to add it. So let's go ahead and read on. We have time that could be used creating art is spent devising clever perks to draw the attention of potential contributors. In addition, audiences may contain many free riders who do not make contributions. Okay, in that case, we're not talking about the type of professional field contributors are from, therefore I don't want to add it, right? Both before and after 27, it did not talk about the professional fields being relevant, right, to contributors. So we don't want to add it there. Why? Well, we don't want to add it because it's blurring the focus of the paragraph, okay? And that's a common answer. If there's a sentence that you don't want to add, a lot of times the answer will be because it blurs the focus of the paragraph. So many times you'll see that you'll have something that's really unrelated being told if you want to add it, and if it's unrelated, you do not want to add it because it's going to blur the focus of the paragraph by introducing a poorly integrated piece of information. Okay, so anything that's blurring the focus of your paragraph, you want to make sure that you do not add. Okay, so if anything is not supporting your argument or is just completely off topic, you want to make sure that you do not add it. Okay, so our correct answer for 27 there is going to be D. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and move on to question 38 to give you another example. Okay, and then after 38, I'm also going to touch on a few tips I have regarding these questions as well that weren't addressed in these particular questions. Okay, 38. At this point, the writer is considering adding the following sentence. Okay, so this is a passage talking about how, I believe that this is the one where we talk about an incident dealing with, let's see, talking about work is inexpensive. Okay, so this one's the investigative journalism passage. So let's talk about investigative journalism. It talks about how a little bit about its history as well as how it's changing now in modern times with technology. So we're talking about question 38 here, so I'll go ahead and give you some context. The exposure by Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein of government misconduct in the Watergate scandal resulted in the resignation of President Richard Nixon in 1974. More recently, Seymour Hersh, reporting for the New Yorker in 2004, helped publicize the mistreatment of Iraqi prisoners by U.S. personnel at Abu Ghraib during the Iraq War. Okay, now in 38, I asked, should I add the following sentence? Okay, one thing immediately jumps out to me is I see in 1954. Well, I'm going to put this in blue so you can see it. Okay, if I look back at my passage, I see I went from 1974 to 2004. Okay, so I'm moving forward in time. I went from the past and I'm moving more towards the present. Now, if I was to go all the way back to 1954, then I would be messing up this chronological order that I have established. Okay, I don't want to do that. So that's one thing that jumps out to me as a red flag right away. But I'll go ahead and read on to see if I do need to add it for some reason, such as something following it in the next sentence or something like that. We have Edward R. Murrow and Fred Friendly produced episodes of the CBS television show See It Now that contributed to the end of U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy's anti-communist witch hunts. In these and other cases, exposure from reporters have served as an important blockade to or scolding of malfeasance. And I'm pretty sure that you have to change 39, right? 90% sure, but it's not dealing with the tip and trick from today's video, so I'm not going to deal with that question right now. But what I see is I see in the sentence after and in the sentence preceding it, there's no need for that sentence, right? So not only is there no need for it, but it is not chronologically correct, okay? So if it were chronologically correct, then one argument you could make, and this probably wouldn't be, if it was chronologically correct, they wouldn't ask this question because it would really just be something where you could just add another piece of evidence if you wanted to, so it wouldn't necessarily have a clear indication, in my opinion. If it was chronologically correct, my guess, they just wouldn't ask this question if it was, I don't think. But in this case, obviously, we see that it's not chronologically correct because we moved from a advancement in time, then we'd be going all the way back to before 1974. So we're not going to add it because it's not chronologically correct, right? So we can go ahead and get rid of A and B. Now we're looking at C and D. We see C says no because it gives an example that's chronologically and substantively out of place in the paragraph, right? So when we were talking about investigative journalism, we were really focusing mostly on print journalism as well, and this switches over to television journalism. So that's another reason why this would not be a good fit as well, okay? Because this, you can't necessarily tell because I didn't read the whole passage, but it was largely about how print investigative journalism is kind of going out of style in this advancement of technology, and we're now innovating. So switching over to television would also not be a great move there. Okay, so our answer there would be C. As far as D, no, because it provides an example that's inconsistent with the passage's definition of investigative journalism. The passage, I don't believe it defined investigative journalism, but even if it did, I'm pretty sure it did include television. It just didn't focus on that throughout it. So D would also be incorrect, right? It's given an example that's chronologically and substantively out of place in the paragraph. That's going to be our correct answer for 38. Okay, now one thing I do want to touch on is I just want to touch on a couple of reasons that are typical as far as when to make an addition and when not to make an addition. So I'm going to go ahead and just move over to the right of my screen, and I'll maybe make a little T-chart, and I'll talk about things on both sides of it real quick. So when to add or keep. So I'll put add or keep on this side. Okay, so these are going to be cases where you want to make sure you add that sentence or keep a sentence there. Okay, and then on my other side, I will have not add / delete. Okay, so I'm just going to list a couple reasons. I'm probably not going to write them all out because that would take a long time, but I'll maybe just give a key indicator, right? So when are you going to want to add or keep a question or keep a sentence? Well, if that sentence has context that is necessary to other sentences in the passage, you want to keep it. Okay, so if it's necessary context, you need to keep it. Necessary context. So you need to have this sentence in order for the rest of the paragraph to make sense. Now, another thing would be if it supports a claim. Okay, if it's something that supports a claim and provides evidence, then you're going to want to keep it in. Okay, so those are really two big things there, right? So you saw in that example of the 3D printer that we needed it to have that context in order for that next sentence to make sense. We also know that if we want to keep a sentence and we want to add if it's supporting a claim in our paragraph that hasn't been supported yet. Okay, so those are two big things as far as when to add and keep a sentence. Now, what about when not to add or when to delete? Okay, number one thing here is if it's off topic. Okay, if it's off topic and it blurs the focus, right, I'll put under that, they usually say blurs focus when you're not supposed to add it or delete. Or if it blurs the focus of a paragraph, you're going to want to make sure you don't add it or you delete it. Okay, another thing is if it is unsupported. Okay, if it's something that's unsupported, for example, let's say that it's a claim that doesn't go on to get supported, and generally if a claim is unsupported like that and you're supposed to not add it or delete it, generally it'll be off topic as well. So I'm actually going to put an arrow up here because generally it'll be off topic as well. So a claim that's unsupported or something like that, but it'll usually be off topic as well. So that kind of loops back there. Another thing would just be obviously if it's out of order, like you saw in that chronological part, that question 38 I just talked about. If it's out of order, you're not going to want to add it. You're going to want to make sure you delete it. So those are really, I'd say, the main things there that I wanted to touch on. So hopefully this video was helpful. Today I have 2 SAT writing tips and tricks for you that deal with antecedents and pronouns. So we're going to go ahead and get started. What it's going to deal with in this case are going to be questions 30 and 31. So I'll illustrate this tip and trick as I go through these 2 questions so you'll be able to see it in action. So tip 1 is going to deal with the antecedents. So we have the sentence here, ironically, the success of crowdfunding may weaken overall funding for the arts if people begin to feel that paying for the art loved by them is someone else's responsibility. So in this case, what jumps out to me immediately when I see 30 here is the word loved by them, or the phrase loved by them. Okay, obviously that's wordy and it's unnatural. Okay, we wouldn't say paying for the art loved by them. We would say paying for the art they love, right? Now, so if they is the correct pronoun here, then that would be our correct answer, right? And they is the correct pronoun. That is the correct pronoun we would want to use. So B is our correct answer here. But I want to quick touch on why C and D you can immediately figure out are wrong. Okay, so if we look at our sentence here, we have the word or the subject people, right? People begin to feel that paying for the art they love is someone else's responsibility. Now, people is plural. Okay, him or her is singular, and he or she is also singular. So I immediately know C and D have to be wrong. Then I'm left between A and B. Obviously, A is wordy and it's unnatural. We wouldn't say the art loved by them. We would say the art they love. So then we would know immediately B would be our answer. So when dealing with a question that deals with an antecedent like this, where you have to find the number of what you're referring to, what I recommend doing is going back through and finding that subject. So in this case, that subject was people. Therefore, we knew that we had to have the plural pronoun they. Okay, next up is 31. So 31, I'm just going to skip down to where it is, and I'm going to show you what I look for here. Okay, so one thing that I immediately see with 31, and I'll quick show you, is I see I have their, her, and its. Now, I know that those are pretty much all here testing me on pronouns. So if I see I have their, her, its, I'm assuming no change would obviously be another pronoun as well, which I see it is. I see it's are. Okay, so I know that this is testing me on my use of pronouns. Now, in order to determine which pronoun should be used, I have to find my antecedent once again. So what I'm going to look for is I'm going to look for my antecedent. So I'm going to start in my sentence by subverting the presumption that money used for her project is an altruistic donation. The playwright showed that her work, right? We know the playwright is female because it's her project and it's her work. Okay, so we want to maintain that parallel structure or that parallelism between it being her project and it being her work. Okay, it has monetary value to those who enjoy it. Okay, so our answer there is going to have to be the answer C. Okay, we want her there. Right, so we know our answer there is going to be C. Now, one thing I want to point out there for 31 as well is sometimes you'll have to go back to that sentence before the sentence you're on to find what that pronoun should be, to find that subject it's referring to find that antecedent. Now, most of the time it will be in that same sentence, but there are occasions where you have to go back to that previous sentence to kind of figure it out. Now, those occasions they can be rare on the SAT writing section. Most of the time it'll be in the same sentence, but it is there, which is why I want to show you that. Now, let's say that you're reading through, right, and then you get to 31 and you got stuck and you were like, I don't know where to look, right? Just go ahead and look back within the sentence. If you can't find a subject there at that point, then go back to the sentence before. Now, if there's a case where you have, let's say that you had, I'll go ahead and go back up to 31. Let's say that you had her, its, we'll say his, right, and then you had option B was something that wasn't a pronoun. It was something specific. And you're going through and you're looking, and keep in mind, I'm not talking about 31 anymore. That answer is C. I'm just talking in general. And you're looking through and you can't find what it's talking about, right? You can't find a pronoun. You can't find a clear subject. And one of your options is a clear subject, and there's nothing else. For example, say that using any pronoun would make it you don't know who it's referencing. Say that there were two people and an option, let's say that they were both female, and the option was her, and you don't know which one it's referring to. And another option is one of the names. You'd want to pick one of the names because you want to make sure it's clear who it's referring to. So in that case, you want to make sure it's clear who you're referencing. So in cases like this where you're using a pronoun, you want to make sure both that you have obviously the correct pronoun, or if there's no option that has a clear antecedent, you want to make sure that you're using whatever option is specific. So for example, if there was a name, you'd want to use the name. Or if there was a proper noun, you'd want to use the proper noun. So that's another thing that you should know for the SAT writing section. Hopefully this video is helpful. Today I have an SAT writing tip and trick for you that deals with dangling modifiers. If you don't know what a dangling modifier is, a dangling modifier occurs when you have an introductory modifying clause, such as far from marking the end of investigative journalism, and then obviously we have to follow that with a comma since it's at the beginning of a sentence, and then the subject that it's modifying, which needs to come after this comma, is not the correct subject. So in this case we have the option cooperation among journalists and ordinary citizens. Now, if you read this passage, you would understand that the modifier here, it needs to modify the advent of the digital age. So C would have to be our correct answer, and I'll explain why. So in this passage, it talks about how far from marking the end of investigative journalism, the advent of the digital age, which it talks about being the introduction of technology in journalism, has actually increased the number of potential investigators by facilitating cooperation among journalists and ordinary citizens. So then if I look at my other options as far as how I can be sure that C is correct, I know that option A, B, and D all have to be incorrect because they would have a dangling modifier. Now a dangling modifier, like I said, that's when what this introductory modifying clause, right, which I put in blue and we'll put circle it in green as well. A dangling modifier is when that introductory modifying clause isn't modifying what it should be. Okay, so we know in this case that far from marking the end of investigative journalism, that is not modifying cooperation among journalists, because we know that cooperation among journalists and ordinary citizens, that's not what's far from marking the end of investigative journalism. So that would be a dangling modifier, okay? So that would be incorrect. Now, if we look at option B, the number of potential investigators, okay? Once again, far from marking the end of investigative journalism, that's not modifying the number of potential investigators. Now, I know that you obviously haven't read this passage, so this may seem like it's a little bit confusing. What I did here is I read the passage, and I know that the advent of the digital age is what is responsible for being far from marking the end of investigative journalism. So it has to modify the advent of the digital age. Anything else that it would be modifying, such as by facilitating cooperation among journalists and ordinary citizens, would be incorrect. It would be a dangling modifier because it's not modifying what it's supposed to modify. Okay, so we know that this modifier up here, this far from marking the end of investigative journalism, has to modify only one thing, and that will be the advent of the digital age, because that is with a subject that it has to modify, and that's what has been talked about throughout this passage. So the correct answer there has to be C. So hopefully that SAT writing tip and trick was helpful. Today I have two SAT writing tips and tricks for you. One dealing with commas and such as statements, and the other dealing with how to effectively set up examples in the following sentences. So the question that says in 41, which of the following or which choice most effectively sets up the examples in the following sentences, that's a fairly typical question on the SAT writing section. So I'm going to give you my advice on how to approach that as someone who has scored perfectly on the SAT writing section on 2 SATs back to back. And then 42 deals with such as and when to have punctuation around it. So I will also address that in today's video. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start up top here at the beginning of this paragraph. That way you can kind of get an idea of context for how to set up the examples in the sentence, right? So we have well worrisome, the decline of traditional print media, and then this is going to be need not entail. 40, the correct answer there is going to be need. I'm not going to get into that because that's not part of the tips for the day. Then we go on, we have 41. At this point it asks us to set up examples in the following sentences. So in order to know what sentence 41 should be, I have to know what my examples are going to be. So I have to skip down. So I'm not even going to read sentence 41 yet because I don't know what it should say because I have to know these examples first. So if you're asked for which choice is going to effectively set up the examples in the following sentences, go ahead and skip that sentence and go down to those examples and read those first because you're just wasting time if you read 41 because you're probably going to end up changing it. So we have nonprofit enterprises such as Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Now in this case, I'm going to go ahead and answer question 42 because I see it's a simple grammar question, so I want to answer that as I read on. So I see I have nonprofit enterprises, and then I have such as the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project have begun to fill the void created by staff losses at newspapers and magazines. Now in this case, such as here is restrictive, okay? Now if such as were non-restrictive, or non-essential, you would have a comma before it. But in this case, it is restrictive because it's referring to the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Okay, so in this case, it is restrictive because it wouldn't be allowing for more than that one. Okay, so in this case, it is restrictive. Now, when such as is restrictive, you do not want to have a comma before it. You want to have no comma before it, and you're not going to want to have a comma after it. So in this case, the correct answer would just be A. You don't want to change it. Now, if it were restrictive, so say for example, if it were non-restrictive, say for example, you had a full sentence, and then at the end you had a comma, such as, and then just a few examples that you could take out. You could take out such as in those examples and it would still be a complete sentence. Then you would want to have a comma before the word such as. Now in this case, you can't do that. Okay, if you were to take out such as the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, then you would be changing the meaning of the sentence because in this case it is restrictive. Okay, so if it's restrictive, you want to have no punctuation before or after such as, but if it is non-restrictive, you would want to have a comma before such as. So in this case it is restrictive, therefore we want the correct answer of A. Now, we can go ahead and read on and get our examples and then answer 41. Okay, so we have begun to fill the void created by staff losses at newspapers and magazines. Enterprising freelance reporters, newly funded by nonprofits, make extensive use of social media, including blogs and Twitter, to foster a public conversation about key issues. The Help Me Investigate project solicited readers to submit tips and information related to ongoing stories for his website. So I see all of those are going to be examples of how we have investigative journalism coming in new forms, right? We have innovative ways, changes to past times, right? In the past, we know that investigative journalism was largely done through print media. Now we see that this increase in technology and these changing times, right? Recent years have witnessed innovative adjustments to changing times, right? We have new forms of investigative journalisms headed by nonprofits, headed by social media, enterprising freelance reporters. Okay, so our correct answer for 41 then would be D. Now let's go ahead and cover why A, B, and C are all wrong for 41 because it's important to understand why some answers are incorrect. All right, so A, no change. Well, no change says, although many newsrooms have reduced their staff, some still employ investigative reporters. Well, that's not addressing these innovative things and these innovative adjustments that have been made in the marketplace, right? Now we have people using social media. We have nonprofits entering the marketplace now. So it's not just those old print newspapers, and 41 doesn't address that, or A doesn't address that in 41. So A is incorrect. B, investigative journalism also declined between the 1930s and 50s, only to be revived in the 60s. Once again, that's not introducing those innovative examples that follow. Now, option C, according to the Pew Research Center, more people get their national and international news from the internet than from newspapers. Once again, that's not addressing those innovative ways that come to follow, right, that are in the following sentences. Now, does it address it more than A and B? Yes, but at the same time, us saying, according to the Pew Research Center, more people get their national and international news from the internet than from newspapers, that's also not addressing the key part here that is investigative journalism. We want to focus on investigative journalism, and that doesn't say that. That's talking about the news in general. So that would be moving away from the main idea of this passage, right? We want to introduce these examples of innovative adjustments in investigative journalism to these changing times of changing technology. So our correct answer there would be D. Okay, so if you have a question that's asking you to set up the examples in the following sentences, what I recommend doing is not even reading the sentence it's talking about and just skipping down to those examples. Read those examples, figure out what it's talking about, come up with your own answer, then you can go back and find what would set up those examples. If you try to answer it without reading on to see those examples, you're just going to end up getting it wrong because you don't know what you're supposed to set up. So you want to make sure you read those examples first, then go back and answer your question. Right, and I already talked about the such as statement and the rules grammatically for that one, so that takes care of the tips and tricks for the SAT writing section of today's video. Today I have an SAT reading tip for you that deals with inference questions on the SAT reading section. So to illustrate my strategy for inference questions and the tip that I have for inference questions, I want to use question 3 from SAT practice test 5. Question 3 states that it can be reasonably inferred that Irma, the waitress, thinks Limey is through eating in line 37 because what? Well, for this tip, I want to talk about how for inference questions, you want to be able to support any answer that you choose with evidence. So any answer that is correct has to be supported by evidence in the text in order for it to be correct. Because if it wasn't supported by evidence in the text, it couldn't possibly be a correct answer since the SAT has to have an objective way to score these tests. Therefore, your answer has to have support from the text. So I see also I'm directed to line 37 for this one. So that's where I'm going to start, is I'm going to go to line 37. And when I'm answering these inference questions, I'm going to look for something that starts a little bit before that. So in this case, line 37 we see is going to be right where I'm underlining. I'm going to start at the beginning of that sentence so I know more context going into it. So I have when Limey put down his fork and began to count them off one by one on the fingers of his left hand, the waitress, whose name was Irma, thought he was through eating and tried to take his plate away. Okay, so my question it was asking me, and I'll go down and read it. It's asking me, why does the waitress think that Limey's through eating, basically, right? Why does Irma the waitress think Limey's through eating? Well, we see that the action that causes her to think he's through eating is him putting down his fork, right? That's our textual evidence to give us our answer there. He puts down his fork, and that indicates to the waitress that he must be through eating. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and answer that one. Our correct answer is going to be he's no longer holding his fork. Now, obviously, you don't have time to read this passage because this is going to be a short tip and trick video, but let's go ahead and cover why A, B, and D are all wrong and what you can learn from that for future inference questions that you may encounter on the SAT reading section. So option A, he has begun reading his book. Okay, in this passage, he has already been reading his book for a while before she tries to take his plate. So therefore, that answer cannot be correct. Okay, it can't be correct because it's not factually true. Also, even though he has been reading his book, he did not just begin to. Okay, so that is factually incorrect. Furthermore, since he's already been reading his book for a while, that would not indicate to her that he's just now through eating. All right, next option, his plate is empty. The passage at no point says that his plate is empty. So once again, that's going to be factually incorrect, right? At no point does it say his plate's empty. Furthermore, he tries to stop her from taking his plate in the lines that follow. I'll go ahead and show you that. We see he stopped her, right? I'll go ahead and circle that. He stopped her. Would he stop her if his plate was empty? No, he would let her take it because his plate is not empty, though. He wants to hold on to his plate. He does not want her to take it. Therefore, his plate is not empty, right? Nowhere does it say his plate is empty. Therefore, incorrect. Okay, option D, he has asked her to clear the table. Once again, that is not contained in the passage. Therefore, that is going to be wrong. Okay, he never asks her to clear the table. So correct answer here is going to be C for this inference question. So the big tips with inference questions are to make sure you support your answer with evidence from the text. Now, sometimes with an inference question, the next question will be your answer to the question above can be supported by which of the following lines or something like that, where you have to find evidence to support it. Now, even if you're not prompted in the next question, which in this case you're not, to find the lines that support your answer, you should still understand where the support for your answer comes from. If you're going to answer an inference question, you should understand that it has to have support from the text. If it doesn't have support from the text, then you're probably answering it with the wrong answer. So hopefully this video was helpful. Today I have an SAT reading tip and trick for you that deals with shifting focus over the course of a passage. So to illustrate this tip and trick, I'm going to use questions 1 and question 32 from SAT practice test 5. So question 1 comes from a passage describing a young boy's dining experience as he reads a book and then awaits the entrance of his father, and then eventually his father comes into the restaurant and sits with him and dines. So over the course of the passage, the primary focus shifts from what? So the things I want to discuss when talking about the primary focus shifting within a passage is you want to make sure that you're maintaining the big picture. A lot of times you'll get caught up in something that's too narrow. For example, answer choice C in this case is too narrow. It talks about the physical setting of the scene, shifting to the different characters' personality traits, but the physical setting of the scene is never the primary focus. Okay, so in the beginning, the primary focus is not the physical setting of the scene. Now, do we describe the physical setting of the scene? Yes, but we would be focusing too narrow on that physical setting of the scene if we were going to pick C, and we would end up getting that one wrong. So we want to avoid focusing in too narrow on one part of the passage. When we're asked to talk about the primary focus shifting over the course of the whole passage, we want to make sure that we're looking at the big picture of the passage. And the big picture of the passage means we're not focusing in on one little detail. So we can go ahead and get rid of C. Now, another reason that a lot of people get questions like these wrong is they use incorrect relationships. So they read the passage and maybe they misunderstood something, or they skimmed the passage and ran out of time, and they end up picking an answer choice that has an incorrect relationship. Now, in this case, answer choice B has an incorrect relationship. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, on the science sections, it's more common that you'll have an incorrect relationship, and obviously in that case, you're not necessarily going to be shifting a focus necessarily as much, but you may be. So on the science section, the incorrect relationship may be between two different variables, but in this case, this was the literature passage, and in this case, the incorrect relationship is stating that Limey, who is the main character in this, he's the young boy, has an exchange between strangers. Okay, in this case, his exchange is between his father and him. Okay, so because he does know his father, this would be an incorrect relationship because it describes them as strangers. So B would be incorrect. Now, another common incorrect answer choice on shifting focus throughout the passage deals with something that is just off topic, unrelated, or incorrect, and that's what answer choice A is here. Answer choice A says that Limey's inner thoughts his inner thoughts to observations made by other characters. Here's what's wrong with this: there are no observations made by other characters, because the only characters that are really talking or making observations in this are Limey and partially his father. Okay, so any observations made by other characters, that's impossible because no other characters are making observations. So A would be incorrect because it's an incorrect it's just an incorrect statement. It's not related, it's off topic, and it's just not true. So it's not a reverse relationship, it's just not true. So A would be incorrect there. B is obviously going to be a correct answer then. It shifts from Limey's experience reading a book to descriptions of people in the restaurant. Right, that's the big picture focus on this passage. So when you're asked to talk about the primary focus shifting within a passage, make sure you look big picture. Don't focus in too narrow on one thing. Also make sure you have correct relationships, and make sure that you're avoiding saying something that's just factually incorrect. So that's one example of a question like that. Now, another example of a question where you're asked to talk about shifting focus throughout the passage that has kind of a different setup as far as the answer choices is question 32. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that one real quick as well when talking about shifting focus within a passage. So question 32 is different in that its wrong answer choices, they don't necessarily display the same characteristics that were in that question 1. So if we look at question 32, it talks about over the course of the passage, the main focus shifts from a discussion of an experiment and its results to what? So in this case, they're giving us the beginning, right? They're giving us what we're starting our passage with, our initial focus. And we're asked to finish with what our final focus is. So in this case, what I want to talk about is why you can't always use the general idea of finding one answer choice that's too narrow, one answer choice that has a reverse relationship, and one answer choice that's incorrect, because sometimes you'll have three that are just factually incorrect. So if you're stuck thinking in this box of I have to find a reverse relationship and I have to find one that's too narrow because both of those have to be there, you could get it wrong because they don't both have to be there. Now they can both be there as wrong answer choices, but they don't have to be. Now if we look at this, answer choice A, we have an explanation of the practical applications of the results. Now, we never provide an explanation of the practical applications of the results in this passage, right? And I'm not going to read the passage to you because that's going to take too long, but we never do that. That never occurs. So that would just be factually incorrect. Okay, that never is discussed in the passage. Therefore, that's just going to be automatically wrong. A is incorrect. Okay, there's no trick there as far as it being too narrow or it being a reverse relationship. It's just not in the passage. Now, if you look at B, a consideration of the questions prompted by the results, that's going to be our correct answer. I can quick show you those questions prompted by the results that we finish with. We see we have the questions. One question is whether the positive herding, I'll go ahead and highlight it, is whether the positive herding bias is specific to this site or true in general. Watts says. He points out the experiment. He talks about economics being a much stronger effect. He asks what explains the difference. So we're really imploring these questions after that. So B is going to be our correct answer there. Now I want to discuss C and D as well, show you why we can't always count on one answer being too narrow, one being reverse relationship, and one being off topic, because sometimes all three are just factually incorrect. So we have C, an analysis of the defects undermining the results. We never discuss defects that undermine the results. So once again, factually incorrect. Okay, so I hope that you're noticing that you can't just rely on picking out one answer choice that's too narrow, one answer choice that is maybe factually incorrect, and one that's reverse relationship, because sometimes you'll have 3 of one kind of incorrect answer. So you can have that as well. D, a conversation with a scientist who disputes the results. There is no conversation with a scientist who disputes the results. Once again, it's not even in the passage, it's just factually incorrect, right? It's just not in the passage. Okay, so answer choices A, C, and D were just not even in the passage. So answer choice there was going to be B. B is the correct answer there. So I hope that gives you a better understanding of looking at wrong answer choices, not necessarily getting too caught up in the idea of finding different types of wrong answer choices, because they can have the same type as being wrong, the wrong answer choice in 3 of the options. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully today's video was helpful. If it was, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. There'll be a donation link in the description if you'd like to donate. If there's any private SAT tutoring I'm doing, or private college admissions consulting, or college essay proofreading I'm doing, that'll be linked in the description as well. As always, make sure to have a great day.